Hello class, my name is Mr. Dupree and I am going to be your instructor for today's lecture on how cultures differ. Sorry for my voice sounding this way class, I am currently dealing with a viral infection that is affecting my CPU, but enough talking about me, let's begin today's lesson on how cultures differ. Cultures can differ in many ways and on many different levels. They can differ from a continental standpoint, to national, to regional, even all the way down to a family, and the way that each culture differs is based off the perceptions of the members of that culture. There are four main categories that we use to generalize a culture, which in turn can be used to compare cultures and observe their differences. They are known as the dimensions of culture. The first dimension of the dimensions of culture pertains to how the people of a culture identify themselves within the cultural society that they live. If the members of a culture focus on individuality and prefer self-responsibility, then that culture is considered to be individualistic. However, if the members of a culture focus on community and being recognized as a whole, then that is the sign of a collectivist culture. The second dimension that is used to characterize and differentiate a culture pertains to a culture's members' collective attitude towards the uncertainty in the everyday events that they partake in. A culture where the individuals feel compelled to try to control the uncertainty in the events that they are involved is known as a culture of high uncertainty avoidance. But when the majority of the individuals are accepting of the uncertainty and are not as likely to pursue controlling it, then that culture is recognized as being a low uncertainty culture. The third dimension used to classify and highlight how a culture differs is how the members of that culture act towards social power. Some cultures are high-power distance cultures that exhibit tolerance and acceptance towards inequalities and social power standing, while the other cultures that strive for equality in the realm of social power are known as low-power distance cultures. The fourth and final dimension of culture that can be used to differentiate cultures is based off of whether or not a culture adheres to traditional sex roles. Cultures where the members primarily follow distinct sex roles are known as masculine cultures. But when a culture is based off acceptance towards the cultural members pursuing a variety of roles, then that culture is referred to as a feminine culture. So, to start, we are going to look and see how dominant cultures can differ on a scale as large as a continent using the four dimensions stated earlier. Continents within the same hemisphere can even differ from a cultural standpoint. Take for example the dominant cultures of North America and South America. In North America, the majority of the inhabitants primarily identify as individualistic, while most of the inhabitants of South America focus on being a group and identify as a collective culture. They also differ in that most North American cultural groups tend to fall within the high uncertainty spectrum as opposed to their counterpart, which is a low uncertainty culture. The two continents also differ on their view of power distance. North America is a continent that strives for low power distance between its members. But South America is the opposite and falls more towards a high power distance culture. They also differ in the fourth dimension of the dimensions of culture as well, because North America embodies a masculine culture while South America is feminine. It is remarkable that two continents that are neighbors and share the same portion of the hemisphere can differ as a whole on every single one of the four dimensions of culture. To make this learning experience a little more enjoyable, how about a quick factoid about how cultures can even differ in terms of how we go to the bathroom? A survey was conducted by a reputable source, like Wikipedia, and found out that 66% of men in European culture sit when they go to the bathroom to urinate, while about 50% of men in North American culture choose to sit when they urinate. This is an example that just about every facet of a human's lifestyle can be attributed to the dominant and co-cultures that they are surrounded by and engage in. Now that we have drained the tank, let's get back to the lesson at hand. Just like how North and South America are in the same hemisphere and differ on their collective dominant culture from a continental standpoint, so do the continental cultures of Asia and Europe, who share the same portion of the hemisphere and are connected by hundreds of miles of land. In Europe, the people are split between individualist and collectivistic identity as their dominant culture value for the first dimension. But in Asia, most of their members identify as a collective culture in this dimension. They also differ on the uncertainty dimension, with Europe having a prominently high uncertainty culture while most of the members of Asian culture prefer a low uncertainty culture lifestyle. They are however the same when it comes to social power. Both adhere to the high power distance in the third dimension, probably a result of them being home to some of the oldest civilizations. But for the final dimension, which pertains to adherence to traditional sex roles, they differ in that Europe is more of a feminine culture while Asia is more masculine. Well, that was exhausting, having to provide you with all that information. So I decided it would be a good idea to stop by the local pub and grab ourselves something to recuperate our energy. So grab a Beck's if you'd like. Or if you're not into German beer, you cannot go wrong with 333, a beer brewed in Vietnam. As you may have figured out, some cultural differences may be easily identifiable, like the clothing that a person wears or by the foods that they consume. Take for example these two individuals in this restaurant. The man on the left is wearing clothing traditionally found in European cultures like that of Germany, while his counterpart is wearing clothes from a traditional Asian culture like that of Vietnam. Not only can their cultural differences be noticed by observing their clothing, but one can also make an assumption by the food they choose to eat as well. While certain aspects of a culture are visible to the naked eye, other aspects like the four primary dimensions of culture are not, but can be discovered by engaging in that culture. For example, by looking at this German fellow, you would not be able to figure that he hails from a culture that is mostly feminine while she hails from a Vietnamese culture that is masculine. Unless one was to engage in that cultural society or with a member of that culture. Here comes the waitress. Let's watch how they interact with one another to see if we can pick up on any cultural differences.
Hello folks, my name is Sarah and I will be your server this evening. Have the two of you decided what you would like to eat for dinner tonight?
For myself, I would like to order a fresh roasted chicken with boiled potatoes as a side and nothing else.
And for you, miss?
Surprise me. I trust you will not disappoint me with your decision.
As you can see, the man who hails from a culture that is of high uncertainty avoidance chose exactly what he wanted to eat and did not want the waiter to deviate from his specified order. But his counterpart who hails from a culture that is of low uncertainty avoidance had no problem with the waiter choosing her meal for her, even though she had no way of knowing what he would choose. Let's now take a glimpse at how these two individuals handle paying for the tab that they incurred while at the restaurant so we can see how they differ culturally in this scenario.
Here is your bill. Thank you again for dining with us at City Walk.
Would you like to split the bill for dinner?
If I earn the money that you do, I would. But since I do not, I will leave you with the bill.
All right. But next time we go out you are paying.
From that little exchange that took place between our two cultural members, we were able to gain a little insight into how each of their cultures deals with social power, the third dimension of culture that was stated at the beginning. From that interaction we are able to assume that the man is from a culture of low power distance because even though he had more financial power than the woman, he attempted to not acknowledge the fact by implying that she was equally capable of paying for the bill by asking to split the costs. Since she declined his offer, one could make the assumption that she is from a high-power distance culture because she acknowledged the difference in their financial power and was accepting of the discrepancy. But we still do not know how the cultures of these individuals perceive sex roles. And I guess we will never know either because they are leaving now.
I am going to go and pull the car around to the front of the restaurant.
All right. In the meantime I will take the baby to the restroom to change their diaper.
Based off of that interaction that just took place between those two individuals of different cultures, a person who observed the conversation would have some insight into the fourth and final primary dimension of culture, which pertains to sex roles. Because the woman was in charge of retrieving and driving the vehicle, while the man was responsible for changing the diaper of the infant, an informed person would realize that they do not follow traditional sex roles. And as a result both must be from a feminine culture. As we have seen, cultures can differ on a scale as large as a continent, down to a country, and can even differ on a scale even smaller than a country, like a particular region of a country. Let's take for example the state of New York. There are certain cultural aspects that we recognize as being dominant within the state itself. Like the fact that New York is recognized as a democratic state as a whole because the state has a history of voting democratically during elections. But if someone were to travel around New York State, they would begin to realize that there are many co-cultures that members of that state culture identify with. Before I go any further, I should clarify what a co-culture is first. A co-culture is a culture that coexists alongside the dominant culture and is comprised of a smaller collective of people that have the same values, beliefs, attitudes, and orientation that differs from members of the dominant culture. If you were to start in Albany and begin to make your way north, the dominant political culture of New York may begin to be overshadowed in certain areas by the political co-cultures of the state. As a result, those co-cultures, while they may not embody the whole state culture, may actually be a dominant culture within that particular region of New York State itself. Well, I think that this video is long enough to satisfy the time requirement for this project. So that's it for me, class. I am out of here. I have a date with a bar stool and an ice-cold pint of Guinness. If there are any questions that you may have, you can direct them to these two guys right here. They seem competent enough to answer whatever questions you may have. Ciao.